Good morning. Good morning, everybody. A little bit of introduction music there. We're not quite 10 o'clock, I don't think, are we? So for those of you that joined in, that was the late, great Leonard Cohen. And the song's called By Fire. And it's based on a Jewish prayer for what they say at the Day of Atonement. So I thought it was quite appropriate. I've got one or two people joining us. Good morning, Emma. Good morning, Jay. So that was Leonard Cohen. There, and I like the words because it was by common trial and so forth. So I thought it's quite nice. It's quite nice. Have a bit of music this time. To start with, well, I think we are on about 10 o'clock. We are. Hope you remember to put your clocks forward. Otherwise, some of you, it's still 9 o'clock and you're probably going to miss it. Well, welcome to our second live session of the Faith Space. This is where, because we can't be in the same place, we've come together to be in the same time and space on a Sunday morning. We can make space for faith. Well, things keep changing, don't they? Things keep changing. Lots are happening still in this last week. And it's happened in the church as well. Baptisms are now suspended. Weddings are suspended. And we can't use the church for funerals either. They've either got to be at the crematorium, which is under strict guidelines, or it has to be at the graveside. I've got one this week. I've got 3 funerals this week, actually. And as you'll see, maybe just here, this is my mobile lectern. Back in the day, I have been known to do outdoor services. And this is a speaker with a battery power pack lectern. So I'm going to I've dug it out, and I'll be taking that down to do a funeral in the week. Well, the others are at the crematorium. Okay, so... And we still can't share bread. We can't share bread. But we can share the word of God. It's one thing which will never pass away. In Matthew 4, Jesus said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Every word. We're in the word. Last week, we reached over 200 people watched this live stream. Quite unbelievable. Before the day was out and through in the week. We don't get that in church on a Sunday morning. Where are they all? Where are they all? I don't know. It's really a new way of doing church, and I'm sure people will be writing books about it, and theologians will be writing them, and church people and such like, and students will have to be part of their course, I'm sure, about how to do church. So what that means is the buildings are closed. We can't use the buildings at all, but the church is open. It's open and it's alive. We are the church. We are the church. I saw on the news in the week an interview with a nurse on the front line. Bless her. And she said before they started their shift, they did something they'd never done before. They prayed. They prayed. How about that? How about that? They actually prayed. There it was. So, okay. Last week I picked out a reading about Jesus calming the storm and applied it to our present situation. And I was thinking about this, about the church. Now it's in effect, it's just not usable, and we can't get. And it's what is going to happen to the church? What is going to happen to us as a church beyond this? So I've got another one this morning about hope. About the hope. It's an underground hope which the church has, and Bob's just joined us. Morning, Bob. So, if you want to grab your Bibles, because you've got them back hand, haven't you? We're in the Word. We're in the Word. There it is. It's all nicely misused, like I said last week. We're in Matthew 13, verse 31. Matthew 13, 31. I'll read it. You can follow it if you want in your own Bibles at home. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch on its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast, like a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Well, we're all hidden away, aren't we, at the moment? Buried, if you like, in our homes. We're an invisible church, forced underground by this virus. Jesus tells us that it's underground where the kingdom of heaven can be found. And he tells the story of the mustard seed. A man takes this really small seed and buries it in the ground. He knows no one will see this seed for a long time, but one day, so he hopes, it will grow so big that the birds will nest in it. It's easy to see ourselves as the sower. We're planting the seed of the gospel. But what if we're the seed? What if this story is about burial, about isolation from the world? So, there we are, buried, hidden from the rest of the world. All around us is darkness and the mess going on. Sometimes all we can see is darkness. And and it is. You turn the TV on and there's only one thing on, isn't there? And it isn't good. Where is the light? Where is the hope in this time? And the darkness and the waiting can be unbearable for us all. The thing to remember is that seeds find hope in two ways. The first is going underground, being buried in the earth, and the second is staying there and holding the ground. If we want something good to emerge from our lives, if we want the flourishings of summer, it will come from patient waiting in the obscurity of the ground, all the way through the darkness of the winter. The persecuted church around the world knows what it's like to have an underground hope. And this is what we've got right now, an underground hope. The Chinese church, it's a really good example of a persecuted church. It was buried for decades and really still is. The Chinese church, it was in 1949. The expression of religious life in China was banned. It was banned. And at that time, there was an estimate 4 million Christians in China. In 1979, which was 30 years later, there was an easing of these restrictions. They lifted them and they let them have some Christian activities. There wasn't 4 million Christians anymore. There was 31 million Christians. It was by being buried that the church grew. Although China is still officially an atheist nation, Christianity is thriving still. And according to some estimates, there's about 115 million Christians in China. And some predict by 2030, China will have more than 247 million Christians. It makes it the world's largest congregation. But still today, these Christians are underground churches because there is a state-sanctioned churches and there is still the underground churches. And even the state ones are very closely watched. And they watch it wearily, the Chinese, because they may get undermined. It may become a political force, and they're fearful of it. And they sometimes persecute that church and tear down its crosses and so forth, and arrest its pastors and things like that. And I think they're right to be worried. I think they are. When you think that Christianity has withstood a repression for over 2,000 years in its history, I think they're right to be worried. So that's one example of what a church looks like when it goes underground. But our ultimate lesson in going underground, in being buried, comes from Jesus. He was the seed more glorious than all others because he was buried to give life. Jesus is the mustard seed sown by God into the earth. His birth was a kind of burial in Bethlehem. It was hidden away. Only 2 people were there. It happened in isolation. His death and his burial at Golgotha again was only, there was only a handful of people. Everyone else was keeping their distance. He lived his life out in a very inconspicuous place, and while he lived, people wondered how and when the new life would emerge. It was not a kingdom of domination and strength, and they thought it would be. Jesus' entire life was a buried seed that brought forth the kingdom of heaven. Jesus' life is all about the journey from obscurity of being underground that leads to a hopeful joy of resurrection. In the Gospel of John, the story of the resurrection of Christ begins with the words, while it was still dark. While it was still dark. The most momentous event in history happened while everyone was asleep. This is the way that God chose to give hope to the world. Because a single seed has been sown for us and for our salvation, we can have hope that is being hidden. Our burial and our time underground will offer life and hope. It's the hope that lies buried quietly through the darkness of this time. We are surrounded by the mess of this virus. Christians are people of underground hope. We put all hope in Jesus' burial among us, and we know our transformation starts being buried ourselves. So what does Jesus say to the church that has gone underground? What does he say? Well, it's what he says to the persecuted church, and he says it to us as a church, because we've been forced out of sight. We've been forced into isolation. Well, it's in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation. Now, I know the book of Revelation is not everybody's cup of tea. It's well worth a read. I like it because, if you ever get a storybook and you think, oh, I wonder how it ends, you read the last chapter, don't you? You read the end. Well, the book of Revelation's the last chapter of the Bible. It's the last one. And I've read it, and guess what? We win. We win. I've read the end. So, at the end of the story. This is in Revelation 2, verse 8. To the church in Smyrna, write. To the angel of the church in Smyrna, write. These are the words of him who is first and last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. So this is a letter to the church in Smyrna. And the first thing we notice is, the thing in the book of Revelations in this, there's 7 churches, and Jesus writes 7 letters to the churches. There's 7 letters to be read out by the angels. And each letter, there is a commendation and there is a correction. But we hear the church in Smyrna, it receives its commendation. They get, well done, you're doing all right, carry on. But there's no correction. There's no correction. And there's only them and one other church that don't get any kind of correction. They just get a commendation. Jesus just says, well done, you're doing the right thing. There's nothing wrong here. And I sometimes wonder if Jesus came back today and he visited our churches, what would he say? What would he say? He'd say, yeah, oh yes, you've got this right and that right, that's really good, but this is where you're going wrong. This is where you're going wrong, I always say to people, if you find the perfect church, don't join it, because you'll spoil it. Don't join it. Anyway, back to the church in Smyrna. It was a good church. Why was it a good church? Because it was being persecuted. Well, this virus is persecuting the church. It's persecuting everything. The church at Smyrna was an interesting church because its name had a lot to do with what was going on with the church. Smyrna had become wealthy, as had Ephesus. Ephesus became wealthy because people were going to worship at the temple of Diana. You may have heard of that. Whereas Smyrna became wealthy through the production of myrrh. It was a place where they took the myrrh and crushed it to make a beautiful, fragrant incense. When Jesus received the gifts from the wise men, they gave gold, that speaks of Jesus' deity. They gave frankincense, that speaks of his intercessory ministry, the incense rising, the prayers, and myrrh, and it speaks of death and burial. Myrrh was mainly used for burial, for embalming. It was myrrh that made Smyrna wealthy. But the church at Smyrna was being crushed, just like the myrrh that was being crushed. But out of this church that was being crushed, a beautiful fragrance would come. That is why Jesus only gave them a commendation and not correction. Because they were a crushed church. You know, I found that when in our own walk of faith, when you go through troubled times, that's when you're closest to God. This is when our prayer life is functioning properly. This is where we really get in a grip of this, of our faith. Jesus says to the church at Smyrna, I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. He knows our afflictions and where we're poor as a church right now, yet during this time of being crushed, we're rich. We're rich. Archbishop Welby, Justin Welby, came on the TV this week and said that church engagement was up at least by 10% last Sunday. People are turning back to God. Nurses are praying, and we're praying for them. Like the mustard seed, we are buried in isolation. Like the persecuted church in China and elsewhere in the world, we are underground. Like the church at Smyrna, we are being crushed by a virus. But just like Jesus, we will as a church resurrect. I hope you've got something out this morning. It's maybe a little bit shorter message than last week and a little bit different. We're going to finish, if we could say the Lord's Prayer together, in traditional form. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Well, Pam and I have got a certain amount of phone numbers. A few people sent them in, and some people sent their own phone number in, and some people sent other people's numbers to me. Because we don't have a lot of people's phone numbers, and there's some people I should have their numbers and I haven't. So we're gonna try and spend a bit of time for everybody in the week, just giving people a ring, just chat, just checking in on people, just say hello, see if you're all right. We can chat. It doesn't have to be about anything much, just a chat, because it's just nice, isn't it? We can pray together if you want, and just stay safe, everybody. Stay safe. Stay indoors. God bless you all. We are still the church, and we will rise again. Please stay safe. God bless.